Hello, everyone. It's Lionel Sender from Pembroke Publishers, and welcome to our webinar this evening. Before we get started, I would just like you to know that Pembroke Publishers' head office is situated upon traditional territories of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of Scugog, Hiawatha First Nation, Alderville First Nation, and the Métis Nation. And the treaty covering this area of land in Toronto, Ontario is collectively known as the Williams Treaties of 1923. I wish to recognize the significant contributions of Indigenous peoples across this land. We seek a new relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, one based in honor and deep respect. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter for this evening, Theresa Miko. Theresa has worked in education for more than 30 years as a classroom teacher, English and dramatic arts head, adolescent literacy lead, assessment and literacy consultant, and vice principal. She's also been an instructor in teacher education at Niagara University and an instructor at the University of Toronto, the SCS Mindfulness Certification Program. She's an advocate for well-being in schools, and Theresa works with adult learners and supports teachers and administrators in literacy, assessment, mindfulness, and inclusive classroom design. And today she will be talking about her new book, Assessment in Action. And I think you'll see as we work our way through the session that she takes all the things that she works in her practice and puts it all together into this book. So we'll be looking at assessment and mindfulness, and inclusive classroom design is all nicely integrated in there. We did this time include Theresa's handout, so you'll notice up on the chat bar on your screen, beside the word chat, there's the word handouts, and there might be a little dot there. If you click on that, you can download Theresa's presentation as well, and that will allow you to follow along with some of the longer quotes that she has in there. So with that, I will pass over the mic to Theresa, and welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Lionel. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for coming, taking time out of your day. I hope you'll get something that you can use in your classroom. So, assessment in action, here we are. I hope you have a moment to pull up those slides. If you can't see it on the screen, this is a beautiful quotation from Richard Wagamese, who is an incredible Indigenous writer. And I always share this quotation with my students, my teacher candidates, just for them to have a moment to think about the students who come through their lives. So Richard Wagamese says, "We approach our lives on different trajectories, each of us spinning in our own separate shining orbits. What gives this life its resonance is when those trajectories cross and we become engaged with each other for as long or as fleetingly as we do. There's a shared energy then, and it can feel as though the whole universe is in the process of coming together. I live for those times. No one is truly ever just passing through. Every encounter has within it the power of enchantment if we're willing to look for it." I'm just going to pause here and invite you to take a moment to perhaps reread that and maybe put in the chat anything that resonates with you, either personally or professionally, from his observation. Or you can just use an emoji if you want to communicate in that way. So I'm just going to pause and see who's out there and what you're thinking. See some hearts. And maybe there's a particular line that strikes you. Yeah. So if you were in front of me and I could see you, I would give you an opportunity to have a chat with a friend, which is part of assessment in action. So in this context, I'm going to share with you the piece that really sticks for me with this when we're thinking about education. No one is ever just passing through. So when you think about all of those students you've taught or are teaching, they're not just passing through, they're real people, authentic people, unique students in a moment with you and with others in community. And I think as teachers, we can come to that and be present ourselves with those students and be attuned to what it is they need. So, Mary, thank you. Recognizing our students are whole. I would change to look for and to feel it. Yeah, Vicki, to feel it. Yeah, to feel who they are, right? To be in connection with them. And that connection is what makes learning happen. And we can help them to connect to each other as well. So here are learning goals for the session. And I'm sure many of you already do this in your classroom, but I think it's really important for us to think about how we define learning goals and how we use them. They don't always have to be shown at the beginning of learning. They can be shown, they can be discovered throughout the lesson. But in this particular case, I wanted to share them up front with you. So have a look at these learning goals and just think about whether or not this is what you signed up for today. I hope so. Some practical strategies and some ways of thinking about how social emotional learning is intertwined with content and student achievement. And then with your students, you might also share the success criteria at the beginning of your class or at the beginning of a unit. It might be posted in your classroom. In my teaching now, I share this each week as I work with my teacher candidates. And at the end of each lesson, we come back to the success criteria and we do some self-assessment and reflection. And we document our learning based on the success criteria. This is what we were intended to learn today, but what did we actually learn? And how do we know that we've learned it? And what's our evidence that we've learned it? You'll know as a lifelong learner that this is really key to independence. What we're looking for in the end is that students are able to self-assess, are able to be authentic in their understanding of their learning and not just doing or studenting, which is an expression from a wonderful book called Building Thinking Classrooms, where kids just kind of go through the motions. And I've been a teacher for long enough to know that this happens. Thank you. Thanks, Anna. Love the safe and brave spaces. So to be safe, we can't always ensure safety for all of our students. We do our best to do that. And to be brave is to encourage students to be themselves. And they can be themselves when we invite them to be their whole selves, to bring their whole humanity to the classroom. And now another quotation for you. And I know this is pretty long, but I'm going to stop talking for a minute so that you can have a read. And then I'll ask you to comment whether or not you agree, disagree, or you're not sure about what Ruth Sutton has to say here. So you can read on your own. So assessment is closer to an art than a science. It's an exercise in human communication. And so see what you think about that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ron. Ruth Sutton wrote this book back in 1991. It's quoted in Growing Success, which is our assessment document in Ontario, which I understand is under revision. But for me, this is really key. And it's so tricky to do both the science and the art. So it's a matter of continued practicing. Okay, Vicki, I'm not a math teacher, but thank you for sharing that. And I don't know if you know that book, Building Thinking Classrooms, but it might be of interest to you because it is all about math. So this is the agenda for today, which basically takes us through the main parts of the book. I'm going to share some of the ideas with you, and I'm happy to take questions. We'll have a little time at the end. So let's just dive in. And okay, this is a drama game we're going to play. I hope you're okay with that. And again, using the emojis, you can connect or you can do it in the chat. So a little bit about me and my background and why I wrote this book. I have a dog. If you have a dog, you say, just like me, or you press a heart or something. So this is a game I do in my classroom really early on in the semester to say, you know what, we are all different people. And we also have some commonalities. So it's a way to help kids make connections with each other. Anybody in the room have a dog? Okay. I have a puppy. Anybody else have a puppy? I've been up since 4 o'clock this morning because of the puppy. I thought you'd like to know that. And then another thing about me is that I study mindfulness. So there's a little icon there from Center for Compassion and Altruism at Stanford. And also I went to a mindfulness conference in Wales. I love horses. Does anybody else love horses? Also, I'm afraid of horses. Okay. And so along the bottom here, I have these 3 pieces. And some of you, if you're language teachers, you might know this framework for thinking about books. The books can be windows, mirrors, or doors. And all of these are from my experiences. So I invite you to think about what text you've been reading that are windows for you, what are mirrors, and what are doors. So this first window is I went to Oxford to study compassion in action. And so that was really a window for me into the school mindfulness project there, which was a huge project in the UK that studied the impact of mindfulness in student achievement. The results that came back were a bit disappointing because they discovered that students actually didn't continue to do the practices after the project, but they did have a positive impact on school climate. And they're continuing to work on that, which I think is really encouraging. So that is a window for me into the world of mindfulness research. And then I've given you a book here, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. So you might think of a book that is a mirror for you. This is the first book I read with my mom. And it mirrors a lot of our upbringing. And I'm an immigrant, which is the door. So this is the door of the library where I'm from. Do we have anybody in the room who is from somewhere else? Or whose parents were from somewhere else? I talk a little bit about that in the book in terms of when those newcomers come to our schools, how do we create a space for them where they feel that wherever they're from, they're welcome, and whatever their background, they're welcome. Romania, thank you so much. Liliana, thank you so much for sharing that. Belarus, wonderful. So our culture, even if we weren't born in that other country, is still with us through our parents. And it's important for us to value that background that our students come with. Okay, a little bit about why I wrote the book. And I should preface this with, I feel like I've been writing the book for my entire career in education. It's just India. Thank you, Christina. This book has taken, my whole career as I've become a new teacher with all of the learning. And we know one of the professional standards is that lifelong learning for teachers. We model that for our students, and we keep revising our practice. And certainly COVID gave us lots of opportunities to do that and was very, very challenging. I will tell you that I taught mindfulness online to teenagers during COVID, and I found it, as much as I love teaching, I found it quite disheartening, as maybe some of you did when you were teaching online, because we didn't know if anyone was with us. And so much of teaching is that interaction, that observation. I share a little, they share a little, I respond to what they share. So I think we're all sort of in recovery from that. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see a wonderful model from School of Mental Health Ontario that starts with the foundations that we're trying to offer in our classrooms. And you'll see that in that foundation, there are 5 pillars. Only one of them is the curriculum, right? Only one of them is curriculum. So curriculum is essential. We need to know what our curriculum is, and we derive our learning goals from there. But we also need to know who is in the room and how they are in the room and what they need in the room. So I think that's a really foundational principle for us. And then People for Education. This is a recent report on well-being and the declining mental health of some of our students. And I will tell you from my experience as a vice principal and a teacher that, many students are coming to us with a great deal of difficulty, and being aware and present in the classroom during the learning for us is essential to their well-being. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's true shortly. So as I was saying, I took a year-long training through Stanford on compassion. And during that training, I did an inquiry project in schools with teachers, with students, about what gets in the way of learning and what are we seeing in terms of our own learning and in our own classroom. And this is really compiled from that. And you can just see some of those responses. What gets in the way of learning is if I don't feel the teacher is paying attention, or if I don't feel the teacher is going to welcome my questions, or if I don't feel that I'm really equipped, I don't understand the language, I don't get the vocabulary, I don't have the background knowledge. So knowing all of this reminds us how important it is for us to be responsive and how essential it is that we use assessment data. And I don't mean standardized test data. I mean all kinds of information, observations, conversations, products about how students are doing. And we're gathering it all the time. We're having a look at it. We're thinking about what it might mean. We're noticing patterns in the classroom, and we're also noticing individual needs. That sounds pretty daunting, I think, but there are ways for us to do this when we build in the time and the space in the classroom. And I do want to be clear that I'm not talking about grading or determining grades here. I'm talking about responsive instruction. So just-in-time feedback, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. Thank you, Ron. I'm just going to take a minute here to have a look. I really wonder if there is any one fact or any one thing that everyone needs to know beyond health and safety. Just wondering. Yeah, thank you for that, Ron. Our students are the curriculum. Yeah. So we can bring them together. Here's the curriculum. Here's you. And I'm going to share a little bit about habits of mind, which I think are the essential things that we're sharing with our students, cultivating those habits of mind that lead to real flourishing. So I hope that answers a little bit, Ron. A little bit about how the book is organized. And I've shared a review here from someone I don't know, someone on LinkedIn, that I was really pleased to see. the opening of each chapter starts with a reflection. And I've pulled research from a variety of research in different areas. So there's the quotation and then an opportunity for us to do some journaling. Every chapter has an essential question, which is part of backward design. If you don't know what that is, I describe it briefly in the book. But if you're looking to find out more about it, if it's a new concept for you, Wiggins and McTighe are the backward design people. But there are some tools in my book at the end that I've adapted from them. And then some margin notes, some additional quotations, some work on habits of mind that are connected to the content. And then a learning journal of thinking routines. So in each chapter, I've pulled a thinking routine or adapted a thinking routine from Harvard's Project Zero, which you can go online to find. Those are about particular patterns of thinking that we come back to over and over again. So we're developing thinking skills. We're helping our students to develop ways of approaching new content. So I hope you find those valuable as well. So I'm just having a look at the time here. And I am going to pick up the pace a little bit so that we'll have some time for some discussion near the end. And if you don't know Paulo Freire, this is a very brief introduction to him and his work on the banking model of education. So for many of us growing up, we would be sitting in classrooms and teachers would be talking at us for a long period of time, and they would not know whether or not we were following them. And maybe this was your experience. It certainly was my experience. So in the banking model, students are seen as passive objects, right? We're just making deposits. And then, at the end of 3 weeks in secondary school, there might be a test in math or English or produce an essay or whatever it is. So the model that I'm advocating is not a banking model. It's a model where the student is an active participant in the classroom and education is an exchange, which means that I'm working with this assessment data in the moment. I'm checking for understanding in the moment. And you'll find in the book, I hope you'll find that there are really practical strategies here for how we pose questions, how we use wait time, how we give questions back to students. We don't do the thinking for students. So I encourage you to have a look at all of those things and try them out. As I said, I've been writing this for a long time in my head and practicing for a long time. And most recently, I've been teaching at Niagara University with teacher candidates and practicing with them and reflecting with them about the effectiveness of these strategies. Certainly, the feedback has been very positive around them seeing themselves as active participants in the classroom and contributors to one another's learning. And that's why we take the time up front to build community in the classroom. And we keep coming back to that idea. So these are some photographs of what's been happening in my classroom. I wanted to make this genuine and honest for you. The idea of classrooms as spaces of hope and possibility. I love this. This is sort of a combination of some reading that I've been doing in identity affirming schools and also some work from Bell Hook's liberatory practices in the classroom. So this is very active learning. This is what we're doing every week. And the piece in the center is again from that book, Building Thinking Classrooms, and the emphasis on having kids standing up together, randomized grouping, having them share the pen, really listening to one another, and problem posing. So in this particular slide, they had gone off to do their practice teaching. They came back with some problems that they noticed. We sorted and classified, and then they had to generate an answer. So, we don't have time today to talk about all of these things, but the book certainly talks about all of them and gives you some strategies. Yes, Dr. Clinton tells educators not to stuff the duck. Yes, exactly. I don't like having the duck stuffed either. I want to be part of the learning, and I want to hear what other people have to say about the learning. That's why I've asked you to participate here with me. Thank you. And here are some other bits and pieces that we've done. Some with my teenagers and the mindful leadership piece, some with the students at Niagara. And there's a wonderful thinking routine called hexagonal thinking, which I've used a number of times, which helps people to make connections between a variety of ideas and concepts. And it's not just put the pieces together. They have to explain why they put them together in that way. And then we do pedagogical documentation. So we're taking pictures of our slides, and my students do a digital diary in which they say, this is what we were learning, this is how we were learning it, and this is what I learned from doing it. So I hope that helps. I just discovered the other day from a good friend that if you take an image like this and you upload it to AI, it will actually summarize and synthesize those ideas for the group, and then you can give it back to them. So I'm just sort of playing with that idea about how we can use that more effectively moving forward. Yes, and I think groups of 3 work really well. Again, the whole idea about how we group students for learning is so important. So we need to think about how we continue to build community by putting different students together all the time, and also addressing issues where there are issues about students getting along. This is something that I did recently, where I asked my students to tell me, first they did it individually, then they did it together. What do I want to feel in my classroom? How do I want to feel? Who do I want to be? And what do I want to learn? And I really enjoyed doing this. And you'll see there's a couple of habits of mind up there that I've put at the top that, I'm trying to build in there, listening to each other, and then thinking interdependently. I thought this was really interesting, and I was sorry to say to the student who wanted to learn financial literacy that she wouldn't learn it from me. So I don't know why I'm telling you that, but I just thought it was interesting. Okay, so I think I've really talked about this, and you can have a look at this image on your own. But it's the whole planning cycle, but the students are right in the middle of it. So I make a plan. Absolutely, I have a plan. We have a syllabus. I know what the final assessment will be, the piece that I will use for evaluation. But I'm responsive and flexible, and that is really the most important idea in this book. That if the students are not with me, we need to make another plan. Yeah, thank you, Anna. Voice and active participation in the process of learning, right? So we want them to see themselves as active agents and participants. Again, this is bell hooks on relationships. Our capacity to generate excitement is deeply affected by our interest in one another and hearing one another's voices and recognizing one another's presence. I think this is so important, that we need to be aware of each other and connected to each other. Ron, I love your question. It's a fantastic question. So when we think about, and this is all in the book, what terminology are we using? It's different in different places. Some places just say it's formative assessment, so it's not actually graded. In Ontario, we use the terms assessment as learning and assessment for learning. So the assessment for learning is the information I'm getting as a teacher and that I'm using to feed back to students. And the assessment as learning is what the students are doing to improve their own work. So once I've given feedback, assessment as learning is their reflection on that. And then finally, we get to the summative assessment, or I prefer the word evaluation because we know we will be grading that. But before I grade anything at all, we have done all kinds of formative assessment. I've looked at some work, I've given some feedback, they've given each other some feedback, there's peer and self-assessment. All of these things take a long time. And I will tell you, I want to be absolutely transparent, that I was out of the classroom for a while as a consultant. And then I went back to being a teacher, and I was teaching grade 10 applied English and grade 12 English and workplace English. And I was trying to bring all of these practices into play. And I found it really challenging because the curriculum is a bit overburdened. So I had to choose which of these things is most important to the people I have in front of me. So more formative and less summative. How do you integrate this approach into the final assessment to align with curriculum? Fantastic, Vicki. So that's the backward design question. So from the very beginning in my syllabus, I know we're doing a digital diary. I know what the learning goals are in that digital diary. I share the success criteria. We keep coming back to it. And then each week, we're adding a component. But then before they actually submit it, there's an opportunity for peer assessment, self-assessment, conversations with me, maybe a 3-step interview, which is also in the book. So lots of that kind of formative work until we finally get to the part where they hand it in for grading. That doesn't mean I haven't looked at it before. So you'll see in the book, it talks about, one of the problems we have in schools is that we grade too much. And those grades are used to sort and rank students. And sometimes that can be very demotivating for students. So thinking about how we can change, how we can shift from so much grading and more actual learning and assessment. And that, we really don't have time. I don't have time to do it all today. Assessment always precedes evaluation. Yes. Interesting that value is embedded in the word evaluation. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Ron. But if you think about how people actually grow, it's not through grading that we grow. It's through assessment that we grow. So we can think about it as a sports model, a coaching model. We're in the game. We're getting information during the game. My kids played hockey and soccer. There's some coaching on the sidelines, right? You come off after a shift, you have a little conversation, you go back out and you try it a little bit differently next time. That's the kind of work we're doing. If you the hexagonal thinking, well, most recently I used it where we did it at the end of the whole semester in at Niagara, and I took the major themes of the course and I had the students make the connections between those themes, and then they had to justify their connections. Why does equity go with culturally relevant pedagogy? Explain that to me. Why does differentiation go with equity? How do you know? How do you make that happen? So the conversation that comes out of it is really important. And again, I didn't use hexagonal thinking as an evaluation. It's a learning task, but it's an opportunity for feedback in the moment. Okay, I hope that answers your question. And I think we're going to have to stay for another 2 hours, Lionel, but I'm just having a quick look here about where we are. Okay, on this slide, I tried to pull the whole thing together. I know you can't see it here, but you could take some time to have a look at it on your own. These questions on the side are really important. So when I'm planning, I'm thinking from the outset about these three things. Where are we going? So who's in the room, first of all? How am I going to design? Universal design and differentiated instruction are central to the process of planning. Assessment for and as learning practices are there from the very beginning. How will I know how we're doing? And making thinking visible and audible. So that's the pedagogical documentation. So those three pieces right at the top. And then I think this is really important. What is the outcome we're looking for students? I was an English teacher for a long, long time. So I used to think when I started teaching English that the outcome was for you to be able to tell me about Macbeth and the structure of the Shakespearean play and why he was a tragic hero and who was to blame for the tragedy and all of those kinds of things. I'm not saying I was a terrible teacher, but I know that there are things beyond what happened in Macbeth that I'm actually after, right? I want students to think critically about whatever it is we're learning. I want them to be able to develop an argument. I want them to ask me a hard question. I want them to ask why this is relevant, and I want it to be relevant to them. I still think Macbeth is relevant, but probably for different reasons. And that's a longer story. We don't have time for all of that today. And then these pieces at the bottom, I've tried to match them up so that we could see connections between them. But for me, the first piece is this sense of belonging. There's a great book. I don't know how long it's been out, but it's called Belonging. And in it, the author talks about belonging uncertainty, which I think is a really important concept for us to know about as teachers, that many of our students, and even us, are not sure that we really belong anywhere. And when we're having that uncertainty, it's hard for us to commit to learning. It's hard for us to take a risk in class, to ask a question, to ask for support, to share our work with someone else. Right? We want kids to be partners in learning with us. And I'm not suggesting that this is really easy to do. And I certainly did a lot of work in this as a teacher, a classroom teacher. Sometimes students are not comfortable sharing their work with others, or sometimes they don't come with the work, or they haven't done the work where they're ready to enter into conversation about student work. But we continue to work towards that, right? I think we're always trying to work towards empowerment, agency, sense of self, and assessment for learning and assessment as learning. Effective feedback can help students to build that resilience muscle. I think the next slide will help me a little bit with this. Yeah, absolutely. So this is iterative, right? We keep coming back and around and keep moving. Yeah, absolutely, Ron. Yeah. Assessment is a collection of information over time. So observations, conversations, and products. We take all three of those, we're triangulating that. And then in the end, we will come up with a grade. But really, in the midst of the learning, I'm gathering that information. And hopefully, if we're working towards that agency and empowerment, my students are involved in collecting their own data and reflecting on their own data and setting their own goals. So there's a lot in the book, and there's a lot of other people who have written about all of these ideas as well. So notice this loop. And if you think personally about anything that you have learned and you have mastered over time, you'll see that this is true for you. So maybe thinking about your life as a teacher. Where did you start? What do you do now? How is what you do now different from what you learned before? Was it that someone gave you an evaluation that made you change? Or was it because you got a little bit of feedback from students, feedback from colleagues, and you reflected on that and you changed your practice? This is what real learning is. And I put a quotation up at the top there from John Hattie that I remember when I first learned it, I thought, wow, that's really important. And I hadn't thought about it in that way, that when students give us work, it's feedback about our own instruction. Right? It's also feedback about, what they can do or what they can do at that moment or what they're willing to do at that moment. But when students are not progressing, the question for me is, well, why? What's getting in the way? Is it the content? Is it the curriculum? Is it something from outside that is, a barrier to their learning? Most recently when I was a secondary vice principal, not that long ago, I had a conversation with a young girl who wasn't coming to class. And she wasn't coming to class because her parents worked at night and she had a very young baby sister and she needed to be available to be home and babysit. And sometimes her parents would not be available in the morning to take care of the child. So she had all of these responsibilities. So once we know that, that is clearly a barrier to this student progressing. And when we're present with students and we're having conversations with students, we can have alternative assessments. We can make other plans, and working with administration, maybe we can make a different timetable or an accommodation. So really bringing that sense of recognizing that kids are all coming from different places. They have different circumstances, and bringing a compassionate approach to that to relieve that suffering. Because we're making decisions that make a difference for their life. So being flexible about how we can accommodate them in whatever life circumstances they have. So I'll leave you with that. And this is really important work. And I if you don't know Johnson's 5, I've given you a link here about how we actually do effective group work. I had the great privilege of working in York Region, Barry Bennett, Carol Rollheiser, and we did a lot of work in instructional intelligence. This is one of the most powerful pieces that I learned about how to structure group work that actually works. It takes work. We need to be explicit in our instruction about our expectations about how students work together. We co-construct the norms. We have environmental nudges, so things, anchor charts posted on the walls. And in this, if we can do this, then we can actually listen for learning, right? I'm not doing all the talking as I'm doing today. My apologies. But we can listen for the learning as we are moving through the groups. We're being present. And we're thinking about how we're putting kids together to work, right? They're not always the same kids together in a group. They're not homogeneous all the time. They're not heterogeneous all the time. Lots of things for us to consider there. And really, one of the things I think is most powerful, and I do with my students now, is processing the group's effort. How did they do? How did they work together as a group? What got in the way? As an adult, we all know how important it is to learn how to work effectively in groups. And sometimes, it can be very challenging. So I want students to have the habits of mind to be able to do that. On this graph, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I will just share with you my thinking here, and I'll leave it to you to think about what you want to do with it. In Ontario, we have these learning skills and growing success. So we're supposed to teach learning skills separately. Teach and assess learning skills separately from our curriculum. So when we report, we can talk about whether or not the student can self-regulate and what is the evidence that the student is self-regulating. What is the evidence that the student can work collaboratively? And they can organize themselves to hand in their work. So there's a part here about grading around, we deducting late marks, all of that. I'm not going into all of that, but it's very clearly defined in that document that they're supposed to be separate. And then the other piece over here, these are the transferable skills. And if you're in Ontario, the Ontario language document just came out. We're supposed to be teaching these. They are in the strands as well, but they're integrated into the strands. So again, we're not teaching them separately. We're teaching them with the curriculum, and we're not grading them separately. right? We're not grading them at all, but we're teaching them. And then we have habits of mind, which is the work of Costa and Kallick, and I think is really important. So how are you actually teaching all of these things? Because these are the things that help us to be strategic learners. So I'll just leave it here, I think, Lionel, and we'll have some time for a few questions. There's a few more slides. Let me just...
Yeah, keep going for this bit because you also stopped halfway to answer questions. So I think people are, yeah, the questions are coming right here. So this is flowing nicely how you're doing. So
okay, well, let's look at this is my sort of my 3 keys, my summary. The first part is you need to be there. You need to be in the room, personally, professionally. You need to take care of yourself. You need to have an awareness about how well you are. Lionel was going to post the really an excellent assessment for cultural humility, thinking about your own humility and how that impacts, and your own social location. How does that impact how you are in relationship with your students? The second key are these pieces of equity, agency, and belonging. This is what we want for students. This is what we want for everybody. And then the third one, and I think this is where we get hung up, because we can make all the best plans in the universe. And honestly, the backward design process, designing down process, it's an excellent process, but still it must be flexible so that we're responsive in the moment to where the students are. So that's the big picture of it. And then this is from Anna, who is in the group here today. And I really love it because some of her students' work is highlighted in the book. And I love that she's recognized that assessment is messy. It is really messy business. We want to be, as we said on the first slide, we want it to be precise and valid and reliable. Absolutely. And it's an act of human communication. And as Anna has so beautifully identified here, sometimes you just capture the learning as you're walking by, but taking that moment to try and make it visible is a really important idea. So thank you for sharing that, Anna. And then this I really love. We are all unique as teachers. And I think giving yourself some grace around trying to do all of this work is essential. So, I mean, if you're far on the assessment journey, fantastic, carry on, try everything. And yes, evaluation can be messy too. Maybe that's my next book, Ron, how to actually determine the grade. I'm just kidding. But I think there are some books on that, which I think are really important for us to look at. And there's an excellent book on this topic called Ungrading. And there's a little bit about that in the book as well. So I encourage you to, do your best, and you can reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can message me there. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. So I think I'm going to leave it there and maybe just give you an opportunity to think about something that you learned today. So I'm just going to have a look at some quotations. Yes, Ron, this is exactly the problem that the book is trying to address. I only care about the grade. And I think, I didn't get a chance to talk about feedback here today, but we can talk about specific descriptive feedback. There's the right time, the right amount, and just the right dose. I don't want people to tell me the 10 things I did wrong in my presentation today. But it would be nice if we could say, you know what, here are 2 things I took away from your lesson, your presentation, and here's 1 thing I'd really like to have seen that you didn't do. So, if I get to do it again, I could take that feedback into account. So I hope that is helpful to you, and I'm happy to answer questions if there are any more questions in the chat.
There is one there that I think ties back, Theresa, to a lot of sort of the group work and the community building, and it comes from Liliana there, just above Ron's, and it says, based on your experience, what is the most effective grouping strategy, or what makes? Sorry, it just jumped right there. Or what makes grouping effective? What criteria do you use? And I know you talked a little bit about the teacher criteria, kind of what you're looking for effective group work. But I think this question is more geared to the actual practice of having the kids in the classroom.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Liliana. So, in the building thinking classrooms, in that research, it was suggested that they did a lot of research over time that working in groups of 3, but randomized, and making sure that the students knew that it was randomized. So they used a random generator on the computer to group kids. And I thought it was really funny that the author pointed out that they had to actually show them that it was random. So sometimes I use playing cards. You got to match up, like there's 3 jacks. If you've got a jack, find the other people with the jacks. If you've got, 3s, find the other 3s. That way of grouping them. Sometimes I use like little plastic things that you can get at the dollar store, all different colors, like different colored butterflies, different color, whatever, you get that. You can use candy bars. They like that, although sometimes they eat them before they get into their group. So there's that consideration. And sometimes I want, I'll be more deliberate about, this student is really nervous and anxious. So I will always, try and say to that student ahead of time, who would you like to work with today? How will that go? And then I'll plan it. So taking all of those things into consideration. I hope that helps, Liliana.
Yeah, no, that I think it does. Thank you. And Ron also made another comment in there that kind of got lost in the scroll, and that's around kids receiving constructive criticism, that having troubles taking that. Is that something that they don't, as the other comment was, I'm only here for the grade. I can't think that person is necessarily thinking, yeah, it's constructive. I'm open to constructive criticism.
Yeah. So, in that book I mentioned earlier called Belonging, and I should probably send it to you, Lionel. Maybe we can send it out to people. One of the interventions around belonging and the students, particularly marginalized students who feel that maybe the teacher doesn't like them, or being particularly feel that they're being targeted, is that we can bring wise criticism. That is the terminology he uses in his book. So wise criticism is how much feedback is the right amount of feedback. So, and as I've mentioned before, we don't want 15 pieces of information about what we've done wrong. Give us 2 pieces or 3 pieces of information directly. And I think this is a really important point because sometimes we get lost. Directly related to the success criteria of this task. Not something I should have known 2 years ago. This particular task and the particular learning we're doing. And give me one thing to work on. And the other piece I would add here is give me time to work on improvement during class. Because a lot of times we give the feedback, and I talk about this actually in my book. We give the feedback at the end of the period. Everyone's leaving. No one has time to think about it. And as Ron said, they just looked at the mark. I got a C. She doesn't like me. But they've missed the opportunity to act on the feedback.
I like that. I like that. I'm going to come back to that in a second with a question, but just to confirm, the book Belonging, that's by Jeffrey Cohen. Did I find the right book?
Yes.
That's the title of the book there then. So great.
An excellent book.
Just one question sort of here, because we're getting near the end and we have a couple sort of wrap up things, and then I'll leave you to close us out here. But in your presentation, I've sort of taken by is the title of your book the right title? This is putting you on the spot, but there's clearly a vision of your experience of what a community looks like in a classroom. And from the questions, I think you have, the choir in terms of they agree with you and they're trying to find ways to enhance and to kind of dig into the specifics of that. If you could call your book something else, and this is not a fair question because I'm putting you on the spot, but like I wrote down here, kind of like it's building community, and there's more to it than, I mean, obviously assessment's a key piece of it, but
Yeah.
would you expand on it if you could do it again?
Yeah, I originally I teach a course called the Compassionate Classroom at U of T, School of Continuing Studies, and so it's about mindfulness and compassion, but it's about living it, right? So the assessment practices that I'm advocating are all absolutely sound and research based and really important. And, there's a certain way that we do things that are really important. But it's with the heart of the teacher that's in it, that who you are. Another great book, if you haven't read, The Courage to Teach by Parker J. Palmer. He says, we teach who we are, and teaching is a daily act of vulnerability. Because when you take away that role at the front of the classroom, anything could happen. If it's not just all focused on you, it's not about the power of you. It's about we're in this together, and we really want to learn together. Sorry, Lina, we're probably
No, I think that's a great
maybe I'll write
answer.
another book.
Well, I mean, we were talking before we started about, and you mentioned it today, around the teaching mindfulness online to students with no faces and no mics, kind of like what we have tonight. And there you're dealing with novice learners, and the challenge of the heart that you're talking about. I think we feel that in the classroom, and that statement at the beginning, the word that stuck out for me from Richard Wagmeese was shared energy, because I don't think there's many jobs where that shared energy has to happen for everything you're talking about. So yeah, there is another book there, I think, for sure. So but I will say to folks, and then I'll let you have the final word here, Theresa. If you would like to check out Theresa's book a little bit more, there's an offer there. If you go to pembrokepublishers.com and find her book or any of our other books, you can use the code AIA for Assessment in Action 24, and that'll get you a $5 off your next purchase. So please feel free to use that code and explore Theresa's book in a little bit more detail, or a lot. But at this point, Theresa, I'm just going to say thank you very much for this evening. I know we all enjoyed the conversation and the lively emojis and the lively chat that went along with it, and your ability to balance those two to kind of do just-in-time answering, which is a skill into itself. So thank you very much. And I'll just leave you with the final words to close us out, and then we'll call it an evening.
Thank you. So I encourage you to go back and look at those 3 keys, particularly your presence. When we are well, our students know we're well, when we're well taken care of, and they feel our energy, right? I've chosen to be here. I want to be here, and they buy in. So I've been teaching forever, and I just find it really fills me up. But there's an ongoing learning and a revision, a reflection. It's really important. And our self-awareness, the cultural humility piece is really important. So I keep bringing myself back to that, and that reflection tool will be helpful. So we're all on this learning journey together. I hope you've got some things that help. I'm on LinkedIn. Honestly, just message me if there's something you're interested in. Thank you so much. And
Great.
Thank you, Lionel. And thanks. I meant to say at the very beginning, I want to thank all the amazing people that I've worked with. Anna, who helped me, Stacy, everybody. And then all the people before, particularly Kathy Costello, who was my mentor and encouraged me to become a consultant. So thank you.
Good. Thank you again. And have a good night, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for being here, everybody.